The Apple Watch tracks your overall cardio health. I was previously low, but I was able to get myself to below average. You might be wondering how I did this. It was simple. I turned 30. Every 10 years, the scale lowers by 5 percentage points. If my math is correct, I should be a great runner in another 10 to 20 years. In all seriousness, I bet that most of us that work in tech have some sort of fitness routine, and a smartwatch or device are probably sitting on more data than we realize. I'm very excited for this next presentation, as it would be really awesome to get insights from the data I've already collected and will continue to collect regardless if I look at it or not. Here to tell us about a much more involved and presumably more insightful journey into fitness and the technology used to track it is someone we are very fortunate to have with us at ETE this year, engineering manager at Elastic and fellow mechanical keyboard builder / enthusiast, Courtney Wilburn. Take it away, Courtney.
Hi everyone. Thanks for having me. Thank you for the kind introduction. I'm here to talk about connected devices. So I'm hoping to go for at least just shy of 45 minutes and then leave the rest of this open for questions. But feel free to go ahead and pop some questions into the chat if you would like. And I will try to do my best to answer some of those questions.
Really quickly, the way that, if possible, and I'll post a link for the Slack invite in the chat. If you could ask your questions in room C as the Slack channel, that way, in case, they'll still be available after, and if there's any that we don't get to during the time that you want to answer, we'll do it that way. So I'll go ahead and post the link now.
All right, great. Thank you so much. Thanks. Yeah, so, as Jack just mentioned, just post some of your questions there if you have any additional questions, and I'll do my best to get to as many of those as I can. So here we go. I've got a slide deck that I'm going to share with y'all. So here we go. So, I call this talk the art of data storytelling. I named it after a song by one of my favorite hip hop groups, Outkast. When I was approached to do this talk and speak at this conference, I was pleasantly surprised. This was, one of my favorite conferences to attend in the past. I, really enjoyed the folks I met, the connections I made there, and I've really have always enjoyed just such a thoughtful, well put together conference, and that was definitely, always had been a highlight of some of my previous years working in tech. So, again, thanks again to the organizers for inviting me. But, I was actually a little pleasantly surprised. And then it kind of hit me a lot of the times when I've put talks together about, various topics, various tech topics, it's been very much centered to what I'm working on. And I've reapproached management, tech management more recently in my career. And, I'm not as hands-on, I'm doing a lot of high level technical planning and tech leadership. And I don't have my hands on the keys on my very loud sort of, brown switched keyboard as much as I would like, and except when I'm typing up meeting agendas or technical documents and things of that nature. And so, I couldn't really put together something that was specific about, a very drilled in specific tech topic. And then I was thinking this is probably, the pandemic has been raging, and I think it would be weird to sort of not discuss sort of the impacts of the pandemic on this, why I chose this topic. This is probably the most riveting thing that I could discuss, at least for me, that wasn't sort of a well-worn topic for me. I probably could have attempted to recycle some of the things that I've done in the past. I've given some talks, if folks have seen it, about Git, about Prince in software development, because I am also a huge Prince fan. But this is probably the most riveting thing that's going on in my life right now. Like it's pretty exciting to me. Like, I could probably tell you, if this was still the before times, I could probably gather data about, tell you about other types of data that I've gathered that, probably be something along the lines of like, you know, traveling or attending concerts, things of that nature. But at any rate, that's a long-winded intro, but I currently work at Elastic, where I'm an engineering manager. My pronouns are she, her, hers. And I have both my professional and personal emails here. So, if you ever want to chat about any of the stuff outside of this conference, feel free to reach out, get in touch that way. So let's start off with a quote. I come from a long line of hellraisers. It's one of my favorite quotes that I found from someone I'm going to mention briefly in a moment here. But I wanted to start off by giving a couple of content warnings, because I'm going to do my best. I'll also do my best to mention some of the things that I'm about to, give a content warning before I talk about some of these things. Again, just right before I do. But if I omit a content warning, I apologize. Let this serve as sort of a generalized content warning for the other things that I will be mentioning generally in the talk. And apologies if I do omit a content warning. I'll also do my best to describe any of the images and charts that I have in here in case people have any difficulty seeing any of these things. I tried to put high contrast slides on here so that folks could see the text, but if that's obscured at all and people have any difficulty seeing this, please let me know, and I can do my best to read through the content directly off the slides. I try not to have everything I'm saying on the slide, so it won't necessarily be a one-to-one relationship between what I'm saying and what's on the slide. So not terribly important if you don't see it, but I will do my best to convey what's on the slide if there are images. So content warnings. So I'm going to be talking about exercise, specifically running, cycling, spinning, and weightlifting. I'm going to be talking about food very, very briefly. Not necessarily about like any specific meals or any types of food, but just like generally like the food as a concept. So cardiovascular illness, I'm not going to be discussing any specific diagnoses, but there will be a brief mention of my family history, and then health. It's unavoidable. I'm not a fan of this concept as much as I once was, which is kind of weird to be saying in a talk that's centered on fitness devices, but that's fine. So more on that a little bit later. One of the other things here that I probably could have made put some data into is one of my other passions that sort of cultivated a little bit more, so to speak, was a love of gardening, specifically growing food, and probably one data point in my dog. I could probably talk about average heights of things that I grew, or how many number of pictures and how that's increased of pictures of my dog that I've taken over the past couple of years here. But this is something that will probably interest only me, but here's a quick visualization of the Scoville units of the chilies and peppers that grew in my garden last spring and summer. With that one on the far right, looks like the tooltip went away there, but that was a Trinidad Moruga scorpion that is the second hottest chili in the world right now. And then at the other end is the jalapeno. I grew quite a bit. Still have pretty close to a gallon of hot sauce in my house at this point. So that's that's fun. From fermented hot sauce from last year's haul there. Also grew a variety of at least 15 varieties of peppers, but these were among the hotter ones here. So, all right, let's get to it. So let's talk about storytelling for a minute, because when we talk about storytelling, we talk about, I think about the things that make a really compelling tech talk. And some of the things that, a lot of the times there's a bit of there's a story. Some of the more the tech talks that have stuck with me in the past have a bit of a story and undercurrent that goes along with it, right? Like a big, and I think that I would be remiss to not mention that there are storytellers, as an African American, there is a long standing tradition of storytelling and the ways in which we convey information to each other. And so, a little historical context, the griot, right? West African bard, so to speak, to, tell stories, convey moral messages, talk about what's going on in the times, in some earlier civilizations, the griots were considered political advisors, trusted members of society, with conveying important messages. I think this talk doesn't even come close to fitting in that category, but I do think that the importance of telling a good story that resonates with people. There's a tradition of this. There's a reason why storytelling is so important to us as human beings. Why why it has value, why concepts stick harder, et cetera. And then, there are some modern day griots, at least in my view. And the woman on the left, Monica Roberts, who unfortunately left us a little too soon, was trans griot. She started a blog, I would say maybe in the late 90s, early 2000s, called Trans Griot, called herself the Trans Griot, had a very strong following on social media, and discussed and kept, when I think about collecting of data, I think about, Ida B. Wells, who collected data on lynchings, who collected, when a lot of folks were avoiding counting numbers. And I think in a similar fashion, Monica Roberts did the same thing in collecting information about violence against trans people in the United States. She was one of the first people to become activated around this and, essentially train herself in data science and journalism to, be able to report on violence against trans folks. And, she's gone too soon, but wanted to make sure that I mentioned her. I think, sometimes, there's definitely there's something to be said about the data that we as a society, choose to have devices that we collect specific types of data on, and what we as a society omit collecting data on. And so I'm glad that, I think, at least the, she collected information that I think a lot of folks wished to avoid, but was, I think, unavoidable. And so I'm eternally grateful that she, I encountered her work in my lifetime. And Joy Buolamwini, who she is a doctoral candidate at MIT and collects data on algorithmic bias, which is something that other folks have been speaking to at this conference as well. And she uses poetry and music and other forms of creative expression to discuss the ways in which algorithmic bias has the potential to affect us in society. And I think it's an incredibly important story that needs to be told. And often, again, to my previous point about Monica Roberts, we choose to collect data and listen to data about specific things, but we're not, necessarily listening to, these are some of the stories that fall in the gaps, right? But, I am neither Monica nor Joy. I am your store brand digital griot. So you're stuck with me for a little bit longer. I am the America's Best or Wish.com version of a griot here. So bear with me. And then we have, sort of the value of storytelling in my family. Value of storytelling is huge. I come from a long line of, really funny, engaging storytellers. And, this is, I hope to do some of them some justice here. All right. So let's get into the meat of this. So let's talk about some of these devices. I don't have a slick segue into this at all. But let's talk about some of these devices. So, a lot of this talk is going to capture the past 5 years or so, but we have, but I've been actually messing with gadgets for much longer than that, right? I think, the fact that I spend probably a lot more money than I should messing with mechanical keyboards and all sorts of other fun peripherals and trying to make them from scratch when factory manufactured ones are probably just fine. Probably speaks to just a lifelong love of gadgets and toys. And so, when I try to engage in sort of, athletic endeavors, of course, I was no different when it came to this. So this is basically a couple of things that I said that I sold my soul to. I think one of the sort of connected fitness devices that I used was a Fitbit. I was allergic to this. I was allergic to the watch band, but once my first one broke, I bought another one inexplicably. I'm not really sure why. And then I actually read something later on that mentioned the beam that they use to penetrate your skin, specifically on certain models of Fitbit, wasn't necessarily capturing heart rates as well on folks with more melanin. So that was interesting. And so that was, when it came time when Fitbit number 2 broke, I switched to an Apple Watch. I had I'm on Apple Watch number 2 at this point, mainly because I'm a little clumsier than I care to admit. But once the UI for Apple Watch is a lot better for Apple Health than I thought it would be. But I also have a lot of other sort of devices of theirs in various degrees in my home. But once they get you with that blue text bubble, it's kind of a wrap, really. Like you get bought in, and then you don't want to try anything outside of their ecosystem, or you're less inclined to try out something outside of their ecosystem, and it gets a little difficult. Nike was another device that I had, another place that I was sort of selling my, giving my data to. And that's probably the oldest data set. It goes back to about 2011 when they started doing some of the running things. They had this little pedometer, and I'm not sure if other folks had this back then, but they had this tiny little pedometer that you could insert inside of a special edition shoe, which of course was like discontinued like 6 months after they manufactured the shoe. It was like a little insert that you would put in, and it would count your steps, but you'd only put it in during a particular activity that you wanted to track. It wasn't something that you always left in there. Not necessarily a great user experience for people who sweat a lot. So I just want to put that out there. But it was sort of one of the earliest ways to track, without, this was sort of before connected watches were a thing. And then a social medium for fitness, which you also can connect to other sorts of services, and they use it as a feed from Strava. Got really coaxed into doing that by some friends of mine, and now it just has become sort of a storehouse for all these different kinds of activities that you can have sources of data that feed into it. And then I wouldn't be, I should also mention that, the Peloton, like the early part of the pandemic had me down bad, y'all. I think I had tried, so to avoid, I was one of the people who spent the end of 2019 laughing heartily at the commercial, the unfortunate holiday commercial that they put out. But by 2020 and gyms closing, I kind of saw the writing on the wall there, because I did enjoy spinning at the gym. And without that, I was in a bit of a tough spot there. And so, I ended up getting a Peloton. I'm actually still using it to this day. So a little bit more context on all this too. Like I didn't come into this stuff like fully cold. There are things that sort of go beyond the 5 years. So like, I have a personal family history of cardiovascular illness, and then extensive personal history of participation instruction and team and individual sports. I have a second degree black belt in Aikido. I did aerobics instruction at one point. So, this isn't the only time I've been participating in stuff, but like, I'm a middle-aged woman at this point, changes in my life and levels of activity and stress. I'd sent some cardiovascular health markers into potentially dangerous territory. I was starting to get messages from my doctor. I was also not sleeping as well. And some of these other things that, sort of give you, and, some of the things that I was able to do as a younger person, I was not able to do as well, not necessarily like looking at specific lengths of time it took to do things, but, things that would tire me out were starting to tire me out more quickly. And so, but also there were some other signs that seemed a little bit troubling, that made me sort of decide that, like, well, during the pandemic, I have myself as a captive audience. Let's try to give this another like earnest go, right? There's more, and so like many women in my age group, I've been consciously and unconsciously absorbing all these messages about my body. A lot of fitness devices, methods, programs, etc., are very strongly marketed toward women. And, even as someone who doesn't conform to traditional gender presentation, I don't think anyone, including, my wife, my parents, or anyone of that nature would say that I have ever sort of adhered to, what is considered to be a traditional sort of feminine or women's gender standards of gender for women. I still have internalized some of those messages, and felt some pressure to conform in some way, regardless of like even not taking any of sort of those health markers into account. So both my desire to conform to this thing, my history of having had, some athletic performance as a younger person, family history of, certain illnesses, and even just family history of participation in sport. All these things sort of drive that motivation. And then you take in sort of a love, an innate love for gadgets. And it's like, the next thing comes along, I feel like it's going to do it, I'm going to probably attempt to buy it. So let's have a look. Let's have a look at the data. So, one of the things that was at least and this is a content warning for just like a particular health marker here, that was tracked across all of these sort of devices was the resting heart rate, both from resting heart rate from activity and then the evening resting heart rate. But I'm taking this is a evening resting heart rate. One of those like while you're at rest, while you're seated, while you're sleeping, what is the average resting heart rate for a in a sedentary way, in a being sedentary. So 2017 it kind of was actually quite high. It was in the high 70 beats per minute. The y-axis there is beats per minute, and the for the average, and then here are the at the bottom of the x-axis there is the years for the total average for the year, which was kind of cool. I actually had this is actually something that was consistently tracked across Fitbit and tracked across the Apple Watch. So I've been able to track that. I have at least it goes back to 2014. I have 7 years, a little bit more than 7 years of almost 8 years of data going back on my resting heart rate. Prior to this, it had fluctuated a little bit, but it was at its peak around 2017. Took a dip a little in 2018 to the mid 60s beats per minute. Went back up in 2019 and has taken a steady decline since then. I think part of that also has to do with age. I am no spring chicken, as they say. So this is one of those things where it's a much like Jack mentioned sort of in the introduction. I think part of it is that your heart rate naturally goes down, but there's also if you look at some of these other things, a bit of an increase in some of these other sort of more important factors here. Average hours of sleep. 2017, I was hitting about seven-ish hours of sleep. Really took a dive in 2019. Side note, and a mild content warning, it was just lots of, I had to deal with some illnesses of pets that required some round-the-clock care between 2018 and 2019. And, that sort of, sleeping through the night kind of went out the window for that period of time. And then steadily going back up. And all of the 2022 figures are as of March the 31st. I wanted to cap the data off a little bit more cleanly at the end of a month. I thought it would have been kind of weird to slap into April. So it's a sort of choice I made there. Daily minutes of activity. The way some of the data are collected here is a little bit different based on device. So it was a little bit hard to find like a pure way to capture this beyond like either capturing pure exercise minutes from one device, or getting an average based on activities tracked in on something like the Peloton or like running specifically inside of like the Nike app or something like that. And that was hovering around a half hour in 2017. Takes a very nice little dip in 2018 and 2019, and again as of right now it hovers somewhere between like the upper bounds, like closer to an hour nowadays daily. So there are a couple other things that were a little bit more difficult to put into a chart. So during periods of higher activity, I actually ended up getting more sleep at night, fewer disturbances in my sleep. I think some of that had to do with 2019 being particularly rough, and maybe me not getting nearly as much sleep and maybe having more time for activity. But weather also seemed to play a part when I added weather in as a factor. I was participating in more outdoor activities during warmer months. That seems pretty obvious. And during colder months, the activities were shorter in duration, regardless of whether they were indoors or outdoors. So I'm not really sure why. And then, like, if I took a vacation that was focused on an activity, For example, I went to Vietnam in 2017 and biked north to south. I was more likely to stay active after the vacation, and was less likely to do so if a vacation involved being less active. And as much as I love sitting on the beach and absolutely spacing out, or laying on my back and staring at the sky from the ocean, and visiting folks that I haven't seen in a minute, if it ends up causing a disruption in a routine, the amount of activity took a little bit of a dive. So it's pretty interesting. So like, what did I learn from looking at all this stuff? Yeah, I think the first thing that I learned was like, companies and like the device makers make it really, really incredibly difficult to get a holistic view of your data if you haven't been loyal to them. And for someone like me who hops from gadget to gadget, it was very hard to attempt to get a very comprehensive view of a lot of these things. There were some, the data export and request, for some of these places, you couldn't easily get any of your data back from the interface of their app or device. You had to, in some instances, you had to request data in advance and give them the date ranges for which you wanted your data. Other times, they would give you all your data, but then it would be separated and divided in various formats. I'm thinking of like, places where they had like the routes for your runs stored as maps and, or coordinates even. And then other places that would just give you a simple CSV with all the information listed across. So you often would have to use third-party applications to clean the data once you obtain it, or even view it in a way that isn't overwhelming. And for someone who currently works for a company that's centered around data, I've done a lot of work with data in the past. This was a Herculean task. This was really not easy to do. I can't underscore how difficult it was to try to find, ways of naming things and standardizing any of the data that, like all of this data that I collected, especially, it was going back in different time ranges and trying to match things up. And then like, even wanting to make things a little bit more interesting and try to line up some of the data with other events. It was just very, 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 very difficult to do. They don't make it easy. And I think part of it is like, they're trying to make you loyal, right? Like it's difficult to take some of your stuff with you once you stop using a particular device. And that's no fun. Fortunately I was able to use products that are available to me through my work to try to look through, to try to visualize some of these things and try to analyze some of these things. But for the run-of-the-mill, person who doesn't necessarily have opportunities to have like high touch access to technology, I'm thinking of like my father-in-law who, based on my advice for some of these things has hopped from device to device. I honestly, even with the amount of time he has now because he's retired, I seriously doubt that it would be a straightforward process for him to try to collect all of his device data from various applications and devices. So like, it was not easy at all. Some things I learned about myself too. I like gamification. If there was like a fake badge or like digital badge or digital trophy that that some device or some app promised to give me, I'm down. Like I want it. Like I'm not sure why I want it. I don't even consider myself a gamer by any stretch of the imagination. Absolutely not a gamer. Yeah, and the illusion of connection to others is more important than I thought it would be. um, uh, I'm not a competitive person by nature, but any place where it seems like I'm either doing something alongside people, I'm thinking of the Peloton, or like, some kind of virtual run or something of that nature. And then like, yeah, I participated. I was a lot more eager to participate in it. As much as that, I consider myself an introvert, not quite a misanthrope, but like the illusion of connection to others, it was very important to me. Another thing, I'm likely at this point, possibly in the best cardiovascular condition that I've been in for some time. And as someone who's, gotten pretty advanced in martial arts and also, uh, done, quite a few other physical things, that's quite shocking to me that would happen. But it was a pleasant surprise that it's happening this late in life. And devices alone have not been a motivating factor for habit change over time for me. So that was actually pretty important. I switched from devices, I think unconsciously, possibly. I was thinking that like a new device would kickstart me into increased activity. And while sometimes that happens temporarily, it probably wasn't the only factor there. And then I think, the pandemic had something to do with it, right? I had myself as a captive audience. I had lots of free time. I didn't have a gym membership. I had time to think through, what it was that I wanted to do and the ways in which I wanted to sought to try to improve my physical condition. But I think the most interesting thing that I found in sort of looking through all this data and sort of trying to try to mash it up with other sort of aspects in my life, or at least the most interesting thing to me, was that it appeared, at least, that the factor that seemed to resonate the most, that like affected my ability to maintain, to adopt and maintain and adhere to, using a particular device or set of devices, was money. It was my income. As my income has increased over time, so has my ability to do more of this. I have more disposable income to buy gadgets. I do not have children. I have a dog, as you see here, who is sniffing a hydrant here. And I have an immense amount of time to and I can abstract away with additional disposable income some of the things that would present themselves as barriers to participating in some of these exercises. If some of these things require a subscription fee, it's a less of an issue. I'm not necessarily stressed about spending money on the subscription to those services or what the impact would be financially, because it's not nearly as great in proportion to my salary. I think part of it too, which is sort of connected to this, is just I have an immense privilege, and especially during the pandemic, to participate in some of these things. I relatively able-bodied. I don't have to worry about things like arranging childcare in order to do some of these things. I can nearly guarantee a good night's sleep and actually pay for things that would presumably enhance or track my sleep. That there's so I was not fully surprised by this, but a little bit unnerved by it, probably because if if my income was definitely a major factor in my ability to, be able to sustain, some of these habits, then what does that say for folks who do not have any of the resources that I do, or fewer resources, fewer financial resources to be able to go from device to device and figure out what works best. Maintain gym memberships. I have a trainer now. I do weightlifting. So my ability to do all these things is certainly affected by that, right? So other folks have to worry about organizing this around shift work as opposed to sort of salaried, more flexible labor. Those are all factors there. And additionally have some external sort of community support to continue this, right? Either via my trainer, friends of mine who are also engaging in similar activities. I did say I am a middle-aged woman, so not the only person I know with a Peloton, clearly. So we can get involved in these parasocial relationships with the instructors and talk to my friends in our group chats about various what they're up to or where they are or what ride we took, and so on and so forth. But I wanted to touch briefly on the concept of health, because I think it's the timing of all this is sort of like odd for me, as I've presumably gotten in this very much improved personally, and if any of these health markers that I'm tracking on that I've tracked on all of these devices are any indicator, my health has improved, and I've definitely seen indications of that, right? It's, after taking up weightlifting for some time, it takes less effort to lift certain things. Don't necessarily get as out of breath during specific cardiovascular activities and things of that nature. But, the concept of health, especially with the pandemic going on, I've taken a lot of time to sort of meditate on this idea of the concept of health. And, I think part of me in sort of taking this up too, and the idea of health and fitness and things of that nature is like trying to think about the roots of that, where it sort of comes from, why doing all this is so important to me, or why I thought it was so important to me. Also kind of coincides with the rise of like health hacking. Were the gadgets like an entry point for me to get into this? So I've been reading a lot about sort of like some of the inherent, ableism sometimes that can come along with things with fitness culture. And I'll be popping these links into the Slack as well, for people to take a look at some of these things and some of the context between the tie between health and ableism, which, if folks aren't familiar with the term, which is the sort of this idea that there is a desirable specific way for your body to be. It sort of leaves a lot of folks who are disabled out, right? And then just racial ideas, racial attitudes around health and like ideal bodies, and what it's like to sort of pursue an idealized version of the body, and like what types of bodies get excluded from that conversation. So, in looking through all that data, I started sort of thinking about ways in which I have felt so personally connected to that, and why. And I'm still unpacking that a bit. Still trying to, ruminate on that. So I didn't want to not mention that. And I don't necessarily have any particular sort of advice for people on how they can do this themselves beyond sort of, saying that, like, one of the things that at least the illusion of community sort of helped in feeling like I had this sense of agency over the decisions I made, about the device I used, how much control I had over it, over both my data and sort of my body interacting with how the data was collected, was probably, it's not trackable, but sort of I feel like a number two in importance, aside from being able to have the resources available to me to be able to, to be able to embark on all this. So that's kind of where I'm ending it. But, appreciate any questions that folks have. I just want to acknowledge the people who made the template that I used here. And I'll be taking a look at the Slack to answer some questions.
Thank you, Courtney. That was awesome. Just waiting on, I see some people typing now. There were some comments throughout as you were presenting, but I'm not sure if there are any questions at this point.
Yeah, so it's like one person mentioned the pulse ox and darker skin. Yes, so I can try to find some of the resources that I found on that. I think that does sort of, at least for me, sort of clouds the accuracy of some of these. Of at least the heart rate data collecting. And I did notice, the pulse oximeters do use a similar mechanism for that. So, my complexion is a few shades lighter than my father's. And, I do worry about the accuracy, when it comes to pulse oximeters and things of that nature. I do worry about that. Not necessarily being helpful. Let's see. The vacation affecting future exercise activity was interesting, but it was super interesting, right? Like, I absolutely, I think there's this part of me like that probably really, really, really enjoys sticking to a routine. I'm not sure how, sort of coming out, like I haven't sort of fully come out of the pandemic. Like, it's I have workout equipment at home, things of that nature. So, I do wonder how sort of like, going on a vacation, once it feels safe for me to, for an extended period of time, will affect my ability to, to consistently, resume training after the fact, or do I need to figure out ways to incorporate it, or do I need to consider taking more active vacations, right? Like I don't really have a great answer for that. Do I find any manufacturer fitness devices I've tried have good data extracts? I've been disappointed by the quality of data I've been able to get on mine. I would say, by good, I would define good, at least for me, as like someone who's not me, right? Like someone who doesn't work for a data company, someone who doesn't have years of experience, dealing with data, and like, been a DBA in the past, would have a reasonable time digesting and understanding whatever data they were able to get once they sort of either requested or, exported their data through some UI. I would say yes and no. I would say probably the most straightforward data that I was able to find was that I was able to get was Peloton data. In the UI, you can just hit a button and you get a CSV of like legit every single workout you've done. With a really high level of granularity of detail, including now they collect like muscle groups worked in particular workouts of different varieties and all kinds of stuff. And that is, and it's just available in a CSV. And then I contrast that with like other services where you're getting like, I got from Nike, even though it was one of my older, longer lasting data sets, is larger than it was over a decade at this point of data. It was a 2 gig XML file. And parsing that was fun. By fun, I mean not at all fun. And trying to figure out significant bits of data across that. And especially, it seemed like some of the more sort of pedometer forward devices, like a Fitbit, tended to give more sort of like simple data exports for some reason. Like, I'm not really sure why. Like, I wish I could I probably could be a whole other talk about like me contacting some of these folks and asking why they make it so difficult, or like trying to figure out like a more user-friendly way for them to export their data. And this is, did I get a sense that any manufactured fitness devices did a good job of addressing concerns around race in fitness devices? I think the only one I've seen address this pretty well, in my view, was Apple. Like they use a different method of light absorption to go through to penetrate the skin. It's different than Fitbit's method, and I don't think that was available on all their they switched, I think, at some point. If my memory serves me correctly, they switched at some point to using a method that was better penetrated melanated skin, and other devices still do not. And so at this point, along with still being in the blue bubble gang on for Apple, it is a compelling reason for me to continue using it, because I get the sense that it's a little bit more accurate, and some of the research that I've read bears that out. So.
I actually have a quick question.
Sure.
Out of all of the kind of different things that you tracked, which did you feel like most correlated with how good you felt, I guess, on a day-to-day basis?
I would say probably I would say both amount of activity and not amount of activity.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Because amount of activity, some of the other things improve. Like if I work myself out pretty hard, if a pretty strenuous workout, I sleep really well. And then sleeping really well means I'm feeling pretty awesome the next day, right? So but then there are times where I work out pretty hard. I do powerlifting now, and doing a particular strenuous sort of workout, and I'm sore in the morning. That's not feeling necessarily great, but cycling through those exercises does take a much longer period of time than say a sort of time capped or distance capped exercise like a run or bike ride or something like that. So yeah, I mean that definitely has had a pretty straight line. I work myself out hard enough to fall asleep, fall asleep, to sleep really well. And then yeah, I mean the sleep thing, I feel like that's going to be my white whale. I think the closer I get to solid bits of sleep, I think the better I personally feel. I'm not really sure if the data, at least sort of the larger body of data, scientific data on sleep necessarily bears that out. But I personally enjoy a good night's sleep.
Yeah.
I definitely feel great after I've had a good night's sleep. Yeah.
Thank you.
No problem.
All right, I was gonna say if there's no more questions, we can go ahead and wrap it up.
Okay.
And,
Well, yeah. Thanks everyone, for attending. Thanks for your time. Oh man, this was delightful and enjoyable, and thanks again.
thank you, Courtney. This was awesome.
All right. Take care, everyone.